Hey everyone, it's Chase Elleby and Joel Williams from Williams Elleby, and today we're going to talk to you about expert admissibility and when experts are allowed to testify at trial. Now Joel, one of the main, theories or cases that we always rely on is Daubert, right? Daubert's sort of the gold standard that dictates when an expert can be used at trial. So why don't we just kind of talk about that and go over some of those topics?
Yeah, so for anyone that's not familiar with Daubert is a U.S. Supreme Court case that kind of started changing the framework for when expert testimony is admissible at trial. There's a lineage of cases that come from Daubert, like Kumho Tire and Joyner and on down. States have adopted that line of reasoning. But the reason it's important is because sometimes expert testimony is necessary in a case. And expert testimony that you may need in a case can range anywhere from accident reconstructionists to safety code experts to architects to engineers to medical professionals and all of that kind of stuff. So what Daubert and the subsequent line of cases that rely on Daubert attempt to do is to make sure that the expert testimony that is presented to the jury is presented in a way that is reliable and trustworthy, because the fact of the matter is that experts in cases are usually paid a lot of money, upwards of $10, $20, $30,000 retainers, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 an hour, all that kind of stuff. So you can imagine that when somebody's paid that much money, then if there's not some kind of control in place to make sure that the experts doing things the right way,
right,
they could try to hedge it, they could try to dodge and weave and make it seem like their opinion is accurate when maybe it's not.
Well, right, you can pay anyone to say anything. It's up to the judge to decide whether or not that person's opinion is credible. So I guess the first thing we look at is whether or not that person's qualified, right?
Yep.
So they got to be qualified. A doctor is typically going to be qualified to talk about their specialty, an engineer, their specialty, things like that. And it's kind of wild because you can find experts really for anything, and it's not necessarily that the expert has to have a PhD in whatever it is, right? They just have to be extremely knowledgeable whatever that topic is. So what's another thing to look at?
Is their opinion helpful to the finder of fact? Sometimes it's the judge, sometimes it's the jury. But a lot of times a party in a lawsuit may take the muddy the water defense, right? And so they try to make mountains out of molehills, or they try to distract and they try to bring in really fancy experts in area A when really the only issue in the case is area B. And so if that expert has no expertise in area B, then their opinion is not going to be helpful to the trier of fact, and the court may exclude it.
Right. And that opinion has to be based on sufficient facts and data. Right. That's another thing to look at. It can't just be, my opinion is A, but they're completely ignoring the facts or the data in the case that are B, and they're trying to put a square into a round peg. Courts are very, very, in tune to make sure that the facts and data that are being relied upon by that expert are also in line with the case.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where the expert can pull those facts and data from independent testing or eyewitness testimony or documents and things in the case, but they cannot just take a giant leap and assume things that are not in evidence or that have not been tested. And when it comes to testing, prong number 4 is sort of reliable principles and methods, right? So I'm sure most people have heard of the scientific method. And there are certain methodologies that need to be used in different areas where an expert may be used that should be followed in order to make sure that the ultimate opinion that's issued by the expert is reliable. And so courts will look at, is the expert employing reliable principles and methods and coming to their ultimate opinion?
That's right. So I guess sort of last is reliably applying the facts and the data to whatever, the expert is trying to testify about. So I always think, we see this a lot in a lot of our car wreck cases are your biomechanics experts, right? They're the ones that are going to say, well, if the car was going 5 miles an hour and the person was sitting at this position and you've got these two vehicles with this weight all applied. These are the pressures and the forces and things like that that are going to be applied. Now, those always get attacked because it's very, very hard to simulate the exact set of circumstances and facts that applied in one rec based on whatever the data is that expert is trying to compare. So that's just one thing that kind of pops up. Is the test that they're using, or is the data that they're using reliable? Was the crash test dummy the exact weight? Were they positioned the exact same way? Could they, show that the crash test dummy flinched or grabbed onto the steering wheel, whatever it might be? So again, you can imagine all sorts of scenarios where experts are going to come into play in a case and try to be used to either strengthen the plaintiff's case by the plaintiff or to weaken the plaintiff's case by the defense.
Yeah.
So, and those are experts that are used in a case. What is another way that you see experts sort of like as a gatekeeper?
You mean like where the courts are trying to gatekeep these?
Well, not only courts, but what if we wanted to sue an expert or someone who has a professional, degree?
Oh, yeah. So everything that we've been talking about so far, Daubert versus Merrill Pharmaceuticals and the line of cases coming down there, that applies in most states, but it applies in federal courts because that came down from the U.S. Supreme Court, right? So we're in Georgia. So we always like to give some love to our Georgia neighbors. And when in Georgia, at least, when you're bringing a professional malpractice case, there is a statute that says that, and it lists out all the different people that you could be suing for a malpractice case. But essentially what it means is that you have to go out and hire an expert in that field in order to file the lawsuit to begin with. So the complaint is the initial document that starts the lawsuit, and you have to attach an expert affidavit to that complaint that says Dr. Johnny breached the standard of care when he did or did not do this. So in Georgia, the professions and the professionals that if you're going to sue them, you have to attach the affidavit to include architects, attorneys, audiologists, CPAs, chiropractors, clinical social workers, dentists, dietitians, land surveyors, marriage and family therapists,
medical doctors, nurses, occupational therapists, optometrists, osteopathic physicians, pharmacists, physical therapists, physician's assistants, podiatrists, professional counselors, professional engineers, psychologists, radiological technicians, respiratory therapists, speech-language pathologists, or veterinarians.
And all of those professionals are listed out in OCGA 911 9.1 if you want to check it out for yourself. But that is just a situation where the legislature has passed and the governor has signed a bill into law that says if you're going to bring this kind of case, you better have an expert to back it up.
That's right.
So if you have the expert to back it up, you also need to take that extra step and make sure that your expert meets all those Daubert criteria that we went over earlier.
Right, exactly. So that's sort of, I guess the way I distinguish it is in those specific situations with those specific professions, you need an expert to just even file the lawsuit. In most other cases, car wreck cases and things like that, you don't need the expert to file the lawsuit, but you may need an expert to help support whatever it is that you're bringing or whatever claims you're making against the at-fault driver, just in a car wreck situation. So.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So if you're claiming any kind of damages or that an event caused your injuries, you may need a doctor, you may need an accountant or an economist. Those are probably the most common ones in car wreck cases. You're probably looking at accident reconstructionist if it's not an admitted fault case or clear as to what happened. In premises liability cases, you may be dealing with architects, engineers, safety code experts, all that kind of stuff. But all of this goes back to sort of stress the importance of if you have a claim, at least reach out to a lawyer in your state, because there may be requirements for experts and there may be requirements to get that expert opinion in that kind of requires the knowledge and know-how and experience of a lawyer who's dealt with that kind of stuff before. And if you think you can handle yourself, no harm, no foul meeting with the lawyer, but at least you might gain some valuable information from it.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
all right. Well, I think that's it on experts and the admissibility of their opinions. If this video has been helpful to you, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.